core values to valued culture. Here is your host, Will Scott, interviewing another CEO about leading culture in their company.
Everybody, Will Scott. Will, thanks for joining me again. We're gonna try this again, my man.
It's fun to be here, Steve.
No one has to know about the trials and tribulations of getting here. No one has to know about that. but I appreciate it. I appreciate it. Well, hey, I'm gonna jump in here, and I guess I'm gonna go backtrack a little bit and just say, for those that don't know who you are. I'm going to have you just kind of give us a Cliff Notes version. I don't want like the full background, but give us a high level of just kind of how you got where you are real quick, and then I want to dive into culture.
Yeah, okay. Well, I guess my entrepreneurial life is really what is perhaps the most interesting, and I've been at that for 20 years. My first company I started in 1999, and we're actually celebrating 20 years this year. It's a supply chain software company that pivoted to be a NetSuite partner. And we open a new client somewhere in the world about every month on a SaaS platform. And business is going great. My next company was also a technology company. That was mobile app development, which I exited in 2016. And since then, I have just been invited by friends mostly to come and do what I did at my own companies with culture. And so a lot of these are friends from the Entrepreneurs Organization. And so then I kind of scripted the process of what I do. I wrote the case studies, and that turned into more engagements. And so now I speak and blog about it. And everything's at culturesours.com. I have something called 9 Deeds in 90 Days to help companies go from simply having core values to truly having a valued culture. And that's that's a subtitle for the book too. The book is called The Culture Fix. Comes out this week, Steve. I'm excited, and I guess that's the quick rundown on my entrepreneurial background to date.
Beautiful. I can say as long as I've known you, and I'm gonna gloat a little bit. I know you were uncomfortable last time I did it, but I've got to say, you are one of the brightest entrepreneurs that I've met over the years, and I know a lot of them. And the reason I say that, Will, is just, I don't know, man. You've always had such a good energy about you. I mean, everyone kind of gravitates towards you. And so, as you've evolved with your businesses, I know how hard it is. But I think one thing that I love about you, if I'm going to kind of gloat about you here, is like, it makes sense that you would have done what you're doing with regard to culture, because I don't know, when you're around people where the energy is just good and they have a natural ability to bring other people together, it's refreshing, right? It's contagious. And I think to have someone like you kind of teaching organizations how to create that internally, it's awesome, man. I'm very excited for you. As you said, the book coming out. So a lot of cool things, man. A lot of cool things.
You're very kind. You're too kind, actually. And before we go any further, Steve, because I'm going to throw this up on my podcast too. Tell me about your business, please.
Oh, wow, man. Yeah. So I do right now. I've had several businesses over the years. And so right now I went from consulting for B2B companies, a lot of manufacturing companies. And now what I do for organizations is I build out content strategy. So what does that mean, right? That's word vomit. Really, I mean, the easiest way for me to describe it is just I help spark conversations. And so what that means is if you've got a sales organization, which most people do, and you've got marketing, my job is to connect the two in a way that basically sparks conversations for salespeople to get into valuable dialogue, which leads to sales. And, it's very delicate. I mean, if you look on LinkedIn or any type of content that goes out there, it's understandable, like why businesses tend to lead with features and they want to sell, because that's what they do. It's very much, look at our stuff.
Yeah, what's the message?
Yeah, my job is to craft communications in such a way that it brings about inbound conversation. And if they do have aggressive sales teams, I basically coach them and a lot of times create the messaging that just gets them into conversations so that a recipient is more receptive to, having a discussion about a sale. My question to you is going to be a fairly obvious one. I think when I'm around people like you that have that type of energy, there's a tendency to think that it can't be taught, or there's, people that are good at building culture or really, bringing people together. Like there's not a formula or it can't be taught. So my question to you is very simple, right? When you go into organizations where the leaders are very business minded and may not have the personality that is contagious or really magnetic, I mean, how do you bake in culture and how do you define that and how do you kind of spark it within an organization?
Well, thanks. It's a great question. And of course, you don't need to be exuberant, which, by the way, is one of our core values at Cultures Ours. So we do embrace exuberance. But you don't have to be exuberant, of course, to be a great leader or to have a great culture. And I believe any leader can do it. But you're right, some people are uncomfortable with some of the more touchy-feely side of it. I love to get CEOs talking about feelings at work, their feelings, and being vulnerable because that helps their team talk about their feelings. And if we want to care about how people feel at work, we've got to be having those conversations. And I believe if people are feeling great at work, then they're going to give of their best and they're going to be more loyal, more productive, more engaged. We have an engagement crisis, according to one Gallup poll here, where more than half of all employees in North America and around the world are disengaged. So I don't know if you can coach, being kind of enthusiastic, but you can definitely have people being including. That's another one of our core values, inclusive, and you can have learn to do what I call the 9 deeds in 90 days, and all it takes is defining the culture, bringing it alive, and then making it thrive so it drives performance. And anyone can do that.
Yeah, it's very interesting. The 9 deeds in 90 days. Obviously, I don't need you to dive into it, but I mean, from a starting point, like when you go into an organization, like what are you looking for, Will?
Well, the first thing I want to understand is what are they looking for, right? Yeah. And of course, in the culture business, we don't go in with any kind of prescribed ideas about what their culture should be defined as. It's all we go in to discover and discern a couple of the 2 deeds, 9 deeds in 90 days, what their culture is, and then define it. And then, of course, once you define it, you can perpetuate it. So, but I begin by asking questions, doing a survey of employees, finding out what the stories are in the company, who are some of the culture czars, as I call them. My company is called Culture Czars for that reason. I want to identify and grow the pool of culture czars, people that care about culture in their company. So we do those things, and then we get into the business of, implementing the 9 deeds, basically. But it starts with that, asking questions and finding out who the czars are.
If you're running an organization, because a lot of times, I know in my experience, like there's a disconnect between what maybe a leader thinks is happening and what's really happening. Like, are there any like red flags when you walk in and someone's like, man, we've got this awesome culture, where there's red flags where it's like, maybe you don't?
Yeah. Well, what a lot of people in my business say is, so I'm quoting, the industry here, is, what culture is not? It's not foosball tables and kegerators, It is more that. So that's one red flag. If people think, oh yeah, we have great culture, we have a company party every month, Yeah. Okay, that's not actually what we're thinking of when we talk about culture. Another red flag is that's a big one, is people have a set of core values, but you go in and you talk to the employees and they all just are cynical about it and say, oh, they just pay, that's just lip service. Yeah, we don't actually do that. Nobody talks about our core values. Those are just words on the wall, And a lot of people think that's it. They come up with some words and they throw them up on a poster and they say, this is us. Well, if that's where you stop your culture journey, your culture implementation, then you have not got it. And that is one of the big red flags, I would say, is that that cynicism that can exist. And, big companies are as guilty as small companies. On my blog, Steve, I talk about Uber and Wells Fargo as 2 big examples of companies that have had core values but just weren't following them, or they were allowing behaviors that weren't what was prescribed by those said core values.
Yeah, and in those big organizations, right, it's probably easier to hide that a little bit. I think with smaller businesses, and small is a relative term. I mean, call 100 million and below, really, right? The idea of, I guess, how often is the culture represented in what is being pushed out to market? Does that make sense? Like, so I'm a customer. How often does that match? Like, is it easy for?
Well, I'm going to say probably not much of the time.
Okay.
Not much, not in large companies. Now, there are examples that I think do. Southwest Airlines is one where you read their core values, and everyone that flies Southwest Airlines will say, "Yep, that feels like them. That's real. That feels real." And another one is Apple. I mean, Apple's core values, anyone that uses Apple products says, yeah, that is definitely, I mean, I've worked with Apple in my mobile app development company, and they absolutely, in that large organization, tens of thousands of employees, they definitely had that culture alive and thriving, and were using it to drive Apple's future. Mm-hmm. And then there are examples like I mentioned, like Wells Fargo. Wells Fargo, one of their core values was, we only do what's good for the customer. We don't, push products on customers that are not good for them. And yet, remember the scandal for which they were fined $1 billion, the biggest fine in U.S. history by the FDIC. Was for opening false accounts in their customers' names so that the Wells Fargo employees could get a sales commission. I mean, I call bullshit on that. And the CEO who wrote those core values and ran that company for, I think, 15 or more years was the same guy that presided over those programs that were in complete opposite of the core values that he wrote. And I just think that's a terrible thing. And I'm going to call bullshit on that. But I will go back to your question and say, I think it is easier perhaps in smaller companies to really control or to manifest the culture you want. But big companies are definitely doing it too, like the examples I gave you of Southwest Airlines and Apple.
So let me ask you, and I'm very excited to read the book, by the way. It's when you have an organization, because like you said, right, you can have these core values on a wall and they don't mean anything. Like when you walk in there, like what do you do after you set the core values? Everyone says, yeah, that sounds like that represents us. That's how we roll. Like how can you kind of bake little things into the company to where there's, I guess, I don't like this word, but like oversight of those core values to make sure that it does marinate and it does actually kind of stick on an ongoing basis?
Well, assuming the core values are appropriate or really are representing the organization accurately, and that's one of the first things I test when I go in. Let's assume that it is, and of course there are examples where they certainly are. Then the way I would encourage those folks to keep the core values alive, which I think is what you're asking, is without bringing a stick, and maybe even really without a carrot, is just to have it become a part of the culture, is to have recognition programs where other employees can catch their colleagues committing a core value and nominate them. And then once a month at the town hall, and I definitely encourage companies that care about culture to have at least one. We used to do them weekly, actually, in my mobile app development company, one all-company address, but at least once a month do an all-company address. And at that event, lift up anyone that was caught committing a core value nominated by one of their peers. And sometimes there are recognition programs for that. There can be monetary awards or not. Sometimes they're just representative awards, like little statues or gold stars or some kind of merit thing, something they can keep on their desk for a month. And it can sound a little cheesy, but where that's alive and thriving in companies, they don't think it's cheesy. They totally embrace it. They love it. They want to win those awards, and they want to be recognized for being a cultural fit. And they really do work. Otherwise, it's easy. People just stop, using them. So that's how we kind of have formal programs. But also I like to train people in how to use their core values every day in the meetings, in their daily huddle, in their weekly management meetings, is to make sure that core values and the culture, therefore, is a part of all of those. And so I love it when people have core values where there's some words that are very personal to the company, and that are kind of fun to use and easy to trot off the tongue. Then that helps, keep those things alive too.
That's pretty cool. That's pretty cool. How long does it typically take? Like if you go in and someone either needs an overhaul of core values or they're starting from scratch, like do you have a rule of thumb, or just, I don't even know if this is a good question, but like how long does it usually take before it sticks? Like where they're just doing it,
Yeah. So my book talks about 9 deeds in 90 days, and you really can do one of these. And obviously, this in 90 days is 13 weeks, but so it's kind of 9 weeks with some spare time in there. There's kind of one task every 10 days or one a week, however you want to play it out. So I do believe in 90 days you can really define and set your culture, your hiring policies, your unhiring policies, establish your core workflow, establish your core people processes, and of course end up ultimately with your core chart, which is the book leads up to this thing I call the core chart, Steve, which I love people to display proudly on the wall, and it answers all the big questions of the what, when, where, why, how of a strategy. What is this company trying to do, and why are we trying to do it? Why being a particularly big one. I like to. That's one of the most fun things, is helping companies, and not many have done that. Even if they've got core values, they still haven't figured out what their why is. So I like to really help companies with that. And then you can have, so the core chart sort of displays it all and makes it all visible, and also helps everybody in the company know where they fit in the company, where they fit in the core workflow, why they're doing the work they do. And I just think it helps folks walk into an office, assuming they're in an office, and it can work with remote employees too, but it helps folks walk in feeling like they belong and like they're excited to spend their day there with the folks they're doing it. That's kind of the culture. They feel good being there. And then they leave at the end of the day feeling they did something meaningful, which is the why. They made a contribution to the world. That's what everybody wants, especially, the younger generations. They don't just want money to be paid to do a job. They want meaning to their work. So you began by asking, how long does it take? You can go through that process in 90 days. But I do think it takes a little longer, depending on one big thing, and that is the people. So the way to change culture quick is you may have to change the people, or at least address the people issues. But the people that make the changes the fastest are the ones that unhire those misfits, the negative nanny in the corner who kind of gives off this energy that holds everybody else back, That's the quickest way to change culture. Unhire those guys, and people think, oh, this feels better, this feels different. Then hire a couple of more good culture czars, culture fits, and you're on your way. So, Yeah.
Yeah, from a momentum, it's interesting you say that. Like from a momentum standpoint, and I'm going to ask you like just the tangible results of changing a culture, because I think a lot of people, they focus on things that are very obvious within a business, and culture is one of those things that, it's hard for some people to really say, okay, how do we make money doing that? Whereas when you're in it, it's, it is pretty obvious why. But going back to the people issue, because I've seen this in doing consulting over the last several years, where even the executive leadership, like a CEO in some cases, can clearly identify this person's a problem. Or they're just, they're the turd in the punch bowl, right? But because of the results that they achieve, whether they're in sales or their position, they leave them there. Like how? So let's say that's the case. Like, have you run into this? What do you do?
The truth is, the answer is, it happens. I see it all the time. And there is really only one answer, and that is, of course, to unhire that individual or individuals and, move the business forward with a long-term view in mind. Because even though that guy may be bringing in the sales next week, long-term, he or she is just hurting the organization. and you're only really going to have an eye to the future and be able to take the lid off things and get that company growing faster and more profitable when you address culture as your number one priority, which means you have to address the people as your number one priority.
Well, I guess let me address associations, and I didn't prep you for this, so this won't be a softball, but it's been interesting because over the last maybe 6 months, I've been working a lot with large associations, member-based organizations. And so my question to you is, like, in that instance where it's not a company, but they still have like a unified, vision in terms of growing and providing value together, does the cultures ours and like what you're doing now, how would you apply that in those situations?
Well, yeah, beautiful question. And the first thing I'll say is that, culture is important in any organization, I believe. This is not just for corporations. And in the book, I'm careful to try and use the word organization sometimes and not always talk about corporations. Because whether you're a religious organization, a not-for-profit, a political organization, I would love to see political organizations care about values, and put a flag in the ground for what they are about and really represent that. Mm-hmm. So any organization, defining families too, Steve. Families. Some families started by guys like Vern Harnish of Rockefeller Habits. He talks about taking values to your family, And Todd Smart has done this very effectively with his family, if you know Todd.
Yeah.
Yeah. So any organization, any team, Navy SEAL unit, Boy Scouts, I think they could all gain value from defining their values as a unit. Now, so that's the first thing. And then, so you mentioned using the example of associations. So I like to encourage leaders and my clients to not just think of leading a company, which is what most of them do. Most of them begin by thinking I'm a leader of my company. I like to ask them to think, how about thinking about leading a culture? Now, I think suddenly that, at least to me, that gives me a squirt of excitement, and makes me think, because that's more expansive. That's bigger than just a company. Ooh, a culture. And yeah, that's right, because it is bigger than your company. Your employees are going home at night. What are they thinking? What are they doing? What values are they representing? Downstream are your customers. What customers do you work the best with? I'm going to bet you work best with customers who have the same values that you do. And if you're deliberate about growing your customers that have a fit, you're going to have altogether better relationships, do better business, they're going to be more profitable clients. Upstream, what about your vendors? If they fit your core values too, they're also going to serve you better, So coming back to your example about the association, yes, of course the association has employees. They should at least have a defined culture. And that defined culture, I believe, should be the same one as goes out to the members of that organization. And then it is for sure going to be more effective, easier to communicate, just easier to run the board of advisors in that organization, because they've got this compass, this true north that determines how they operate.
I love it, man. And coming from the reason I love stuff like this, man, and when you were doing this, I got very excited, because from a content perspective, right? When I go into an organization, usually the first thing I'm trying to figure out is, what stories can we tell? What type of conversations can we spark? And almost always, I'm not thinking about the product or service. That's almost like an afterthought. And so I always think to companies like Zappos is a good example years ago. They went to bat on service, right? We service. They were just selling, what they sold was an afterthought. And all the stories you would hear about them, it wasn't like, hey, we sold 500 pairs of Nikes last week, or look at the latest Louis Vuitton sneakers. It was always like someone called for a pizza and Sally serviced them, or these things that fascinated people. And from a content perspective, they drive conversation. And I think if you start with culture and you really have a culture, the idea of telling the story and bringing people into your organization, into really valuable conversations, becomes so easy. When I go into an organization, I'm always looking at okay, what are we good at? What are you guys, what's interesting here? What are the people like? And if you start with a foundation of culture, it's very easy to say, okay, here's your culture. Identify 3 things that happened like in the last quarter that meet these. Oh, Jim did this thing with his local Boy Scouts. Sally ran this marathon. Okay, great. For me as a content guy, that's where I start. And then I back into the product. But it's interesting to me, Will, even me doing my job, if a company really knew their core values, like from the jump, my job would be so easy, because we'd have a meeting and they'd be able to identify like that, the stuff that they were proud about, that was interesting, that was going on in the organization. Because, we're in a commoditization world, right? The consumer assumes that whatever you're selling or doing, it better be good, like it better be on time, because, it's just like, that's default. So it's kind of like, what brings people, even the customer, into that culture? And you see it time and time again, man. The companies that get it right and they bring it all together, they win. They win. And if they don't win, their lives become much easier from making money. So.
Well, that's very interesting, Stephen. Kudos to you for starting with really the human stories when you go into a company, right? More than the product, you're starting with the human stories. And maybe you're leading with that when you come to do the marketing because, again, those are going to be more, well, we all know stories are more memorable. Mm-hmm. And also, depending on the story, they're also going to touch feelings, which make people connect with the brand more. So, I agree with you. If a company's got their culture defined, then everything is easier after that. Everything is easier. But you know what, Steve? Not all companies can necessarily define their culture right out, like a startup, right out, mm-hmm. out the guy. They can start to work on it. Hey, what are our values as a group? But I find that companies that have had to execute business for a while and been through the ringer a couple of times, they really do learn a bit more there about what their DNA is and who they are. And that, so, I like people to definitely draft them, but not set them in stone right away. Mm-hmm. But at some point you can set them in stone and they're going to be good for the duration.
Yeah, it's really interesting, Will. And one of the things that you said earlier that struck me was the concept of thinking long term. Because to your point, I think a lot of organizations that may be struggling, maybe facing culture issues. Typically, if you're jammed up and you've got bottlenecks and you're struggling to grow, I find it hard to believe that a refined and a healthy culture wouldn't help at least fix a lot of that. And so I guess hiring someone like you or just kind of focusing on culture is something that can say, okay, right now things aren't right. So to your point, maybe the culture is not organic. But stepping back and saying, what do we want this to look like? And then how do we map that out and execute it so that it becomes reality? Right? So I'm making an assumption here, but that sounds like what you do.
Yeah. So I'm definitely assuming that a lot of companies have core values already. But what are they doing with them? Have they just got core values or have they truly got a valued culture? So the 9 Ds is really about how do you have a truly valued culture and not just have words on the wall. But of course, I also help companies put the words on the wall. And I think you were starting to talk about how do you do that? How do you discern what your core values are? Well, I definitely offer, my program. It's all free to download at the website at culturezars.com. There's a workbook, and in fact, that the book, the Culture Fix, at the end of every chapter is a workbook section, and it helps people define their core values and then take it the rest of the way. So yeah, it's all free on the website.
Well, I love it, Will. I'm gonna wrap it up here, man. But I appreciate you and I'm not just saying this, man. I really do. I appreciate you just as a person. Your energy is always good. I love being around you when I am, and I'm just so excited for what you're doing. Not only because of you, like I'm not just excited for you, but I really do believe if someone else came to me and said, I'm starting a business around culture, I'd be like, okay, like it just seems like a natural fit, for what you're doing. And so, I'm just really excited. And
no, it definitely is. I love my 2 tech companies, but I definitely feel like this is an alignment of what my what I'm here to do. And, Steve, it began when I was growing up in Zambia. I used to love building clubhouses, and I built tree houses. I built underground caves. I built forts on stilts. I built bamboo houses underneath a mango tree with a fence around it. I built all these things, right, on my own. I mean, I just loved creating clubhouses and building environments. It was only much later on that I realized that I like to build environments. Why do I do that? Well, I like to build environments where people can be the best that they can be. Mm-hmm. And I used to. So how do you do that? I wanted to share them. I mean, you don't build someone and then sit in a treehouse on your own. You want to share it with somebody, right? So then I would invite my friends, but I built this thing placed so lovingly and so carefully. I didn't want just people just to come and trash it. Yeah. So I'd pin some rules up on. You can see where I'm going here. I'd pin some rules up on the side of the treehouse, and when I invited new people in, the first thing I'd do is then say, listen, hey, we're going to have a great time, but can you please, note this is what we all agree in this club is to follow these rules. And there'll be things like, don't break anything, don't trash the place, keep it secret, don't tell any adults where it is, that sort of stuff. And then be nice. You say one of them was just be nice. Yeah. And so as soon as a couple of my friends were not being nice to each other in there, I didn't have to be the bad guy or reprimand them. I would simply point to the rules and say, hey, we all agree to be nice. And that's really how culture can work in companies too, and core values can work. They empower everybody, and they sort of set a level playing field for everybody to have a standard of behavior, that if someone's stepping outside that standard of behavior, it's easy to correct without sounding like an asshole. Because there's the permission on the wall for me to say this to you, Mm-hmm. So, that's how I began. And funny enough, now I find myself doing that. And those rules on the treehouse are not that different from, core values in corporations today. And I don't know why anybody would want to try and run a company without core values. Just like I don't know why anybody. Imagine trying to coexist in the United States, Steve, at the highest level of what. Yeah. Imagine trying to coexist in the United States without a constitution. And the Constitution is really just a set of values by which we can all kind of agree and follow. And then, of course, now it's been codified into law, but it began with the Constitution, a set of values about how we want to, we the people, how we want to coexist. And so I think it's really important in companies too. But thanks for giving me a chance to tell my story about the treehouse. No, man, that's what a great way to wrap it up too, Will. I love it, man. So I'll link to everything. Definitely, the book's coming out on the 20th, and if you're watching this after the fact, it'll be on Amazon and everywhere. So check it out. We'll link to it. I'm a fan, man. I'm happy for you, and I look forward to the next chapter, my friend. Thanks very much, Steve. I appreciate the invitation. Cheers. That was good, brother.
Thanks for listening. Be sure to click subscribe, check us out on the web at culturezars.com, and we'll see you next time.